The golden hues of sunset bathed the wide-open lawns of the Atheist Conference in Kerala, where open-air sessions sparked spirited discussions among freethinkers, skeptics, and curious onlookers. Under temporary tents and swaying coconut palms, booths and chairs had been arranged in circles, each hosting debates on science, history, and belief systems. In one lively circle, a diverse crowd had gathered. The energy was electric, voices layered with anticipation. At the center stood Liyaqat, a former Muslim and prominent voice in the ex-Muslim movement, known for his sharp criticism of Islam. He stepped forward, his voice clear and assertive. "Friends, I want to talk about something rarely questioned in public: Islam and slavery. If the Qur'an was truly revealed by a just God, why didn't it simply outlaw slavery outright? Why does it talk about those whom your right hands possess? And if Islam brought equality, why didn't it begin with liberation?" The crowd murmured, some intrigued, others tense. Before silence could return, a young man stepped forward. Tall, calm, with an inviting gaze, he introduced himself with a nod. "Peace and good evening. I'm Yusuf, a Muslim and a student of the Qur'an, and I truly believe the claim that Islam supports slavery collapses under the light of the Qur'an itself." Liyaqat folded his arms. "Then explain the term, 'those whom your right hands possess.' Sounds like ownership to me." Yusuf smiled gently. That phrase, "ma malakat aymanukum," was used for people already in servitude when Islam emerged. The term itself appears in Arabic in the past tense, indicating a condition that pre-existed. The Qur'an didn't establish this system, but it addressed the reality of its time, and in doing so, it placed such profound and transformative measures around it that the continuation of slavery became unsustainable. He turned to the wider crowd. "Let's begin with Qur'an chapter 47, verse 4. Perhaps the clearest reform ever revealed about war captives. When you meet those who disbelieve in battle, strike their necks until you have subdued them. Then secure their bonds and either set them free as a favor or for ransom until the war lays down its burdens." That's it. 2 options: release with kindness or release for compensation. What's not there? Enslavement. The silence is deliberate and revolutionary. A curious student raised his hand. "Excuse me, Yusuf. This verse clearly refers to prisoners of war, and I notice it doesn't include enslavement as an option. But can you clarify something? What exactly is the difference between prisoners of war and slaves in the Qur'an? Were they treated the same way?" Yusuf's face lit up. Brilliant question. And here's the key. The Qur'an uses a distinct term, asra, for war captives, most notably in Surah Muhammad 47:4, where only 2 options are permitted for dealing with them: release or ransom. The same word, asra, appears again in Surah Al-Anfal 8:67. It is not for a prophet to have prisoners, asra, until he has thoroughly subdued the land. The singular form of asra is asir, which is also mentioned in the Qur'an in Surah Al-Insan 76:8. "And they give food, out of love for him, to the needy, the orphan, and the captive," asir. This term, asra, denotes temporary captivity, not ownership. In total contrast, ma malakat aymanukum refers to those already in historical servitude. The Qur'an began a new policy. Prisoners of war were not to become property. They were to be released, graciously or through ransom. The 2 roles are completely different. One was being phased out. The other was redefined. A middle-aged man stepped forward with a skeptical tone. But why not abolish slavery immediately? Couldn't a divine message do that? Isn't gradual reform just compromise? Yusuf turned toward him, nodding with appreciation. That's a valid and important question, and it calls for historical realism. Sudden abolition may sound ideal in theory, but in deeply entrenched societies, immediate disruption without a support system can cause more harm than good. Even in recent history, when Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery in the United States, many freed individuals struggled to survive. They had no land, no income, no education, and no societal inclusion. In desperation, some even requested to remain with or return to their former masters, not because they preferred slavery, but because they had no viable alternative. Islam understood that, so instead of abrupt release into chaos, it built a society where emancipation came with empowerment. That's why Qur'an, chapter 24, verse 33 says, "And those who seek a contract for freedom, test them. If you find they are capable, then help them gain their freedom." Islam wanted the formerly enslaved to rise as independent, capable citizens, not abandoned shadows. At that moment, another ex-Muslim from the crowd stood up. Arif Hussain, a seasoned debater with a sharp voice and a confrontational tone. "Yusuf, let me ask you directly. Is slavery halal or haram in Islam? No evasions, just a straight yes or no." Yusuf met his gaze without flinching, his expression composed and his voice unwavering. Slavery is haram in Islam, absolutely and without exception. The Qur'an prohibited the enslavement of any new individuals. The laws it mentioned were meant to deal with an existing social condition, people already in bondage, not to approve or perpetuate the system. Instead, it introduced a roadmap for gradual and irreversible emancipation, cutting off slavery at its roots. So let's be clear. Islam didn't come to preserve slavery, it came to end it with dignity, justice, and direction. Any attempt to say otherwise is a distortion of the Qur'an's message. A woman in a hoodie called out from the back. But what about the narratives in Islamic traditions that seem to present slavery as something normal or acceptable? Yusuf responded, his tone calm and respectful. That's a valid question. Yes, there are some narrations attributed to the Prophet and recorded in later compilations that have been interpreted by some to suggest acceptance of slavery as a social norm. To understand this, it's important to consider the historical context. The major hadith collections, while valuable for preserving the legacy of the Prophet's life, were compiled over 2 centuries after his passing. By that time, the political and cultural environment had changed significantly. Many Muslim rulers had reintroduced pre-Islamic practices, including slavery, influenced by political motives, societal pressures, and the norms of empire building. In that setting, it's understandable that some reports may reflect the realities of their time, rather than the transformative and liberating direction the Qur'an had set in motion. This isn't a critique of hadith literature itself. Rather, it's a reminder to interpret all secondary sources in the light of the Qur'an, which remains the primary and unchanging standard. As the Qur'an itself reminds us, do they not reflect upon the Qur'an? If it were from other than Allah, they would have found in it many contradictions. Qur'an 482. The Qur'an offers the foundational guidance. Our role is not to dismiss the historical record, but to evaluate it through the lens of the Qur'an's clarity and justice. And that message is unmistakably clear. All human beings are honored. No soul has the right to claim ownership over another. Liyaqat looked at him, his expression shifting from skepticism to reflection. So you're saying the Qur'an didn't just regulate slavery, it restricted it until it collapsed? Yusuf nodded. Exactly. The Qur'an prohibited new slavery in war, as stated in 47:4. It encouraged freeing slaves as a great virtue. In Qur'an 90:13, freeing a slave is called the steep path, a sign of moral courage. In 5.89, when someone breaks an oath, the prescribed expiation is feeding 10 needy people, clothing them, or freeing a slave. Think about that. If you mess up, your way back to God is to free someone else. That's not support for slavery. That's moral elevation. Qur'an 24:33 tells us something radical for 7th century Arabia. And those who seek emancipation from among your slaves then make a contract with them if you know they are capable. Therefore, the Qur'an made emancipation a legal duty. It allocated public fund, sadaqat, meant to be used also for freeing captives. Qur'an 9:60. Moreover, the Qur'an affirmed the inherent dignity of every human being when it declared, "And we have certainly honored the children of Adam." Qur'an 17:70. This honor and respect are not conditional on race, class, or status. They are universal. To enslave another human being is a violation of this God-given dignity. And in Surah Ali Imran, verse 79, the Qur'an reinforces that no human being has the authority to demand servitude from another. A man in the crowd raised his hand. Then why did later Muslim empires practice slavery? Yusuf looked him in the eye. Because they betrayed the message. After the Prophet's death, the Muslim world fell back into old habits, reviving pre-Islamic systems for political convenience and military gain. They claimed Islam, but they ignored the Qur'an. Many Muslim empires chose wealth over wisdom, sword over scripture. But that doesn't change the book. The Qur'an still stands, still waiting to be heard. He paused, then added thoughtfully, even modern scholars have recognized this disconnect. David F. Fort, emeritus professor of law at Cleveland State University, called it a great mystery in Islam. He observed, Islam should have been the first civilization to have abandoned slavery. It was the last. Islam should have been the first to establish social equality for women, but instead, the opposite is often true. And he's right to raise that paradox. The ideals were there, clearly spelled out in the Qur'an, but history shows how political ambition and cultural inertia buried them. Our task today is not to defend those betrayals, but to uncover and revive the original message. A young woman from the audience asked softly, "But why didn't we learn this in school or from mainstream preachers?" Yusuf sighed. Because the message of the Qur'an was buried beneath centuries of imperial ambition, clerical silence, and cultural decay. But the Qur'an is still here, waiting for us, in plain Arabic. Liyaqat was quiet now, his earlier fire replaced with thoughtfulness. You've made me see something I hadn't before. I came here expecting defense of tradition, but you offered a vision of liberation. Yusuf smiled gently. That's because the Qur'an was never meant to uphold systems of oppression. It is not a manual for control. It is a timeless call to freedom, dignity, and the restoration of human worth under the authority of none but God. The crowd began to break into small circles of conversation. Some stood in silence. Others approached Yusuf with questions. And as the last rays of sunlight faded over the Atheist Conference in Kerala, an ancient message found new life, spoken not in anger, but in clarity, dignity, and hope. Dignity and hope.